Well, good morning. Good morning. We are so excited to be here this morning, and we're so excited about our guest. But before I introduce her, there are a few other folks I need to introduce. First of all, I'd like to ask the members of the Pittsburgh Board of Directors to please stand and face our audience. Okay, we have Dr. Regina Hawley, Mr. Bill Eisler, and Mr. Tom Sumter. And one of the things you're going to hear about is politics. And these are people that engage in the work of the community every day. And so they're at the grassroots level of political organizing and working for the betterment of the Pittsburgh community. So we're happy to have them here. And we also have Mr. Sam Taylor, who is the director of the Carnegie Museum. And we talked a little bit about figuring out a way for students, didn't we, Dr. Walters, to get to the museum so that you may see the collection at the museum right now. So we're going to figure that out. But for our honoree this morning and our guests that we are so pleased to welcome to Pittsburgh Obama and to Pittsburgh is, of course, former Secretary Madeleine Albright. I had the opportunity to hear her speak last evening. And my husband and I were both there, and of course he's extremely impressed with her, as am I. But what I didn't realize was a couple things about her that I guess I enjoyed learning. One, she's a second-generation teacher, and I didn't know that. And I'm sure she'll tell you a little bit about her teaching work. But she had wonderful stories. She's had an incredible career. And we are all so very proud of her, and as I know everyone in this room is. And she could have come. I told the students before I came downstairs, Miss Albright, that we knew you could have visited any school in Pittsburgh today. But we are so grateful you are here. So please join me in giving a warm Pittsburgh Obama welcome to Madeleine Albright.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Lane. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted to be at the school. Love the name. And I love the program, the idea that you are dedicated to international education and international affairs. And I'm very, very pleased to be here and very pleased to be in Pittsburgh. It's a beautiful city. I was born in Czechoslovakia. I came to the United States in 1948 when I was 11 years old. And I had always loved, my father was a Czechoslovak diplomat, and so I grew up with foreign policy. Other people may have had other discussions at dinner. That's all we ever talked about. Wherever I went to school, I started an international relations club and made myself president, and insisted that people talk about international relations. In politics, I have been a card-carrying Democrat my whole life. But I also felt very strongly that it was very important in all kinds of political endeavors that I've been involved in that people understand the importance of international politics, of international relations. And so I have been an advisor to many Democratic presidential candidates, and I was supposed to always advise on foreign policy. And the discussion was always about domestic policy. So in order to make myself more important, I would say domestic and foreign policy are connected. The bottom line is they are, and you can't discuss one without the other. And as we look at what the issues are today, they clearly are our economy, but our economy can't function if we don't understand the interdependence of the world. So it all goes together, and I am delighted to see young people interested in international relations, international history, culture, and politics. So there's a lot to talk about. Let me just put a few things on the table, and then we'll have our panel discussion. I wrote a book called Memo to the President-Elect before I knew who the president was going to be. In the end, I did give it to President Obama with the idea, I said, I hope this book may be minimally helpful to you. I laid out several what I call big umbrella issues that had to be dealt with by the next president, whoever that person was going to be. The first one was how to fight terrorism without creating more terrorists. I did not like the term war on terrorism because the people who attacked us on 9/11 were murderers, plain and simple. And if you call it a war, then they become warriors within their own societies and, I think, gain greater stature. So I didn't like that term. The second big issue that I thought needed to be dealt with was nuclear proliferation. There are more countries that were trying to acquire nuclear weapons, and then non-state actors, the terrorists and others, who, in fact, I was concerned that the worst weapons would get into the hands of the worst people. The third big issue that I thought needed to be dealt with was the growing gap between the rich and the poor, not only in the United States, but in the world. By absolute numbers, there were fewer poor people because the Chinese have raised the equivalent of the American population out of poverty, but the gap between the rich and the poor was growing. And first of all, it's just plain wrong to have such a differentiation between those who have everything and those who have nothing. But I don't want to draw a direct line between poverty and terrorism, but it doesn't take a great imagination to think that people that are completely alienated from their societies are more likely to be recruited by people who don't like us. Then I thought that another huge issue was that whole kind of combination of subjects: environment, energy, global health. And then the last big issue was how to restore the good name of democracy. I believe in democracy. I think it's the best system of government, but you can't impose it. So I felt the imposition of democracy through military means was the wrong way to go. I didn't have the financial crisis because it wasn't going on at that time. It obviously is a dominant aspect of an umbrella issue. And then there were ongoing problems that had to be dealt with. The situation in the Middle East, what had to be done vis-a-vis North Korea, the ongoing fighting and aspects, for instance, the genocide in Darfur that I felt needed to be dealt with, a different relationship with Latin America. So I laid out a lot of issues. I do think that, as I said earlier, there's no way to exist without the United States being engaged, actively engaged internationally. I do believe in the power of the United States, but I believe that we do much better in partnership with other countries. Therefore, I am very supportive of President Obama's foreign policy. I say his middle name is partnership. He has worked very, very hard to work within alliance systems, to respect others in terms of dealing with the issues. Frankly, the issues that I laid out, really, it's very clear that they can't be dealt by the United States alone, no matter how powerful we are. We can't deal with nuclear proliferation by ourselves, or dealing with terrorists or poverty. So it makes a lot of sense. And I think the issue is how all this works. Now, I look at all of you. You are the next generation. We screwed things up. And I think that when I went to school, I went to college sometime between the discovery of fire and the invention of the BlackBerry. What I learned when I was in college was how the United Nations was founded, and NATO, and a lot of other organizations. At the moment, I think that there's not a lot of confidence in many of the organizations that are out there. And they need to be restructured to fit the 21st century. I always say I was the last Secretary of State of the 20th century and the first of the 21st. The only problem with the statement is that I started making it about 6 months after President Clinton named me, which was really presumptuous, that I would stay all 4 years. Well, I did, and so I am. But the bottom line is that the 21st century looks different than the 20th. And you are the 21st century, and we have to look at how the institutional structures really work to suit you, America in the 21st century, how we get along with other countries, how we feel about our political leaders, and that eternal question that I'm sure you've taken up in class is, what is the relationship between the individual and the state? Do we get our rights from the state, or do we give our rights to the state? I believe that individuals give their rights to the state. We are the basis of a country, but the relationship between the government and the individual are what a lot of the questions are about. So those are kind of just a lot of subjects. I'm very happy to be here with all of you, and we will deal with the questions, and very nice to have me here. I'm really
Thank you.
grateful.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And good morning, and we too are excited to have you, Dr. Albright, here with us at Pittsburgh Obama 6 to 12. Just a little bit about our school. We are the Pittsburgh Public Schools' only international baccalaureate program, and the only one in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that offers a comprehensive international baccalaureate education in an urban setting to all of its students in grades 6 through 12. We offer, again, the prestigious International Baccalaureate Middle Years program for students in grades 6 through 10, and then the diploma program for students in 11 to 12, where our motto here is nothing in life is so complicated that it cannot be achieved by discipline and hard work, and that's what we believe as students becoming global citizens. So I'd like to now turn it over to introduce our panelists, our 6 students that we have. To my closest to me, to my left, is Angela Perfetti. Angela is a senior here at the Barack Obama Academy of International Studies. She's the captain of the varsity soccer team and president of the Youth and Government Club. She's a volunteer tutor for East End Cooperative Ministries Extraordinary Tutoring Program. She's also a member of the National Honor Society and received a high honor roll, as well as the Pittsburgh Public Schools Distinguished Achievement Award. She hopes to attend the University of Pennsylvania with a major in Near Eastern Studies or biology. Let's welcome Angela. Our second panelist is Jacqueline Clark. Jacqueline Clark, known as Jackie, is a senior at the Barack Obama Academy of International Studies. She's the captain of the varsity cheerleading squad and coach of the middle school cheerleading team. She's also involved in planning teen forums. She enjoys participating in community service through the Greater Pittsburgh Food Bank, Lot Carey Baptist Foreign Mission Convention, and the Rodman Street Missionary Baptist Church. She was crowned the first Miss Ebony Teenage in the spring of 2010. She's a Ben Carson Scholar and has received other scholarships to further her education, including Ohio Dominican University and Bowling Green State University. She's awaiting arrivals of acceptance from Howard University, Hampton University, and High Point University, completing her top 5 schools on where to further her education. In the fall of 2012, she will major in secondary education history. Third on our panel is Nigel Littlepool, who is also a senior at the Barack Obama Academy of International Studies. He's involved in varsity tennis, the African American Centers for Advanced Studies Executive Committee, and is a former Pittsburgh Promise intern. He's also a member of the National Honor Society and a member of Obama's High Honor Roll. He will be attending Columbia University School of Engineering in the fall, where he was recently named a Prescott Davis Scholar with a $51,000 a year scholarship. Nigel says that you can follow him and other prominent Obama students on Twitter at Team Dream Team. Next is Kaylee Donovan. She's an 11th grader at Obama Academy. She's the captain of the tennis team and is a part of the drama department. She's very involved in international studies and is a member of Amnesty International, Model United Nations, and the World Quest team. She hopes to study history, international relations, and peace and conflict resolution in college. Next to Kaylee, we have Fletcher Jones. He's a junior at Barack Obama Academy. He's heavily involved in the Obama Drama Program, participating in the annual Cabaret, 1X, and the award-winning spring musicals. He is also a member of the National Honor Society and is a member of Obama's Honor Roll. Fletcher also enjoys graphic and web design in his free time. He aspires to be a psychology major in college. And last but certainly not least is Max Okabayashi, and he is a junior at the Barack Obama Academy of International Studies. He is an athlete on the baseball, water polo, and soon-to-be championship swim team. He is a member of the National Honor Society and World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. He has an avid interest in history and international affairs and hopes to be an international affairs major in college. So all 6 of our students will have an opportunity to ask Dr. Albright a few questions, and so you can use the microphone in front of you, and we'll begin with Angela.
So, from your experience as an ambassador to the United Nations, how effective do you think the United Nations can be as a peacekeeping organization?
Well, I loved being at the United Nations, and I found it a very important organization. I always kid about this, but when I was a sophomore in high school, I actually won the Rocky Mountain Empire, that would be Colorado, Wyoming, et cetera, contest about the United Nations, because I was able to name the 51 countries of the UN at the time in alphabetical order. At the moment, there are 193 countries, so I don't think I could do it. But I think the UN has evolved in very important ways, and peacekeeping is one of the most interesting. When I arrived at the UN in February '93, there were something like 60,000 peacekeepers out in 14 different peacekeeping operations, and peacekeeping had changed a lot. It had initially been something that happened after there had been an agreement in order to keep the forces apart. But the problem was that here the United Nations was the global emergency number, and yet it was only, the office in New York was only open 9 to 5 on weekdays. So we were trying to figure out how to make peacekeeping more effective, and also to get the peacekeepers out before there was an agreement, in some ways to be peacemakers. And one of the things that I did as UN ambassador, I went to visit all of the peacekeeping operations, and they were very impressive because they were a mixture of a variety of countries, and so the peacekeepers would have their national flag on one shoulder and the UN flag on the other, and they worked together. But the issues were that some of them had never seen each other before they ended up, whether they were in Angola or Cambodia. They weren't sure their weapons were all interoperable and whether they all spoke any language that they could communicate in together. And so what I've been for is not to have a standing UN army, because then there would really be no political control over it, but to figure out a way where the peacekeepers could actually train together and learn about what they were supposed to do. But I think they play a very, very important role. There are problems, however. I think you've been reading about that some of the activities in Congo, for instance, they have not behaved well. There are those who are trying to make sure. One of them is a woman who's a friend of mine. She's Swedish, Margot Wallström, who's at the UN now, in order to try to make sure about respect for women by the peacekeepers, trying to figure out how to make sure that they perform in a reputable way where they're needed, and also who contributes to the peacekeeping. So I think it's one of the most interesting evolutionary parts. And I spent a lot of time on it, and I think they do play a very important role. But again, like everything else, it has to be monitored and to make sure that they do what they're supposed to do.
Okay.
Thanks.
Being the first woman to become Secretary of State, what obstacles, if any, did you have to overcome to make your presence known in the country as well as in the world?
Well, the part that is so hard to believe at this point is I may have been the first, but I'm not the only. And my granddaughter, when she turned 7 a couple of years ago, said to her mother, "So what's the big deal about Grandma Maddie being Secretary of State? Only girls are Secretary of State." So in her lifetime, good luck, guys. But the part that was interesting is that when my name came up, people really did say they weren't sure that a woman could be Secretary of State. When I had been sworn in, they said primarily that Arab countries would not deal with a woman. And what happened, I was at the United Nations for 4 years before, and so the Arab ambassadors up there kind of got together and said, we had no problems dealing with Ambassador Albright, we would have no problems dealing with Secretary Albright. But there really was a question as to whether a woman could be secretary. And then somebody at the White House, I never wanted to know who, made a dreadful mistake and said to the press, yeah, Madeleine's name is on the list, but she's second tier. And that kind of I had not wanted to be Secretary of State only because I was a woman. I wanted to be Secretary of State because I thought that I would do a good job, and that's what the president would think. But that kind of energized a lot of groups, and they said this is outrageous. And I was named Secretary of State. And when I walked into my office, the office of the secretary is on the 7th floor of the State Department, and you walk down this hall, which is all mahogany, and they have the portraits of the former secretaries of state. And they all were white men who either had beards or mustaches or were clean-shaven. That was the only distinction. And I thought, okay, when my portrait goes up, the walls will shake a little bit. My portrait is up, so is Secretary Powell's, and Secretary Rice and Secretary Clinton will follow. So we've survived it. The bottom line, though, is that I went on my first trip abroad. Now, I did go in a very large plane that said United States of America in order to meet with the Gulf Cooperation Council, which are all Arabs. And at the end of the meeting, I said to them, well, I'd really like to thank you. Perhaps you've noticed I'm not dressed the way that my predecessors were. You were very kind, and we had a good meeting, and next time we'll talk about women's rights. And we did, actually. And I had more problem with the men in our own government. Not because they were all male chauvinist pigs, but because they actually had seen me go through a very long rise in my career. It took me a very, very long time. I had been a carpool mother. I had been on school boards. I had done a lot of volunteer work. I had been a staffer on the Hill for Senator Muskie. I made a lot of coffee. I did a lot of Xeroxing. I had been in a lot of jobs in campaigns. And they thought, well, how did she get to be Secretary of State when I should be Secretary of State? So it was not easy. And it wasn't even easy after I was Secretary of State, because there were not other women in the room particularly. And my great friend was Hillary Clinton, but she was First Lady and not in the room during discussions that we had. And I had to continue to prove that I could do the job. And so I think it did make a difference ultimately that I was the first. I'm very proud of that. But as I said, now it seems to be the norm. So, yeah.
Given your experience in the region, do you think that the revolutions that have occurred in the Middle East in the past year, do you think those will lead to stability or democracy in that region?
Well, I have spent a lot of time on the issue of democracy. Both academically and also I'm chairman of the board of an organization called the National Democratic Institute, which is part of the Endowment for Democracy, something that President Reagan started. What happened was in 1983, he was speaking in London, and he was saying that democracies were not really good about explaining themselves vis-a-vis communism. And so he came back and he started an organization called the National Endowment for Democracy that has Democrats and a Democratic Institute and a Republican Institute and a Business and a Labor Institute, kind of the warp and woof of society. And so I have followed democratic developments across the world. I believe that we are all the same. I never thought it made any sense when people said Asians couldn't be, that Asian values didn't allow democracy, or whatever group in the world was not ready for democracy. I don't believe that. I think that people want to make decisions about their own lives. They want to decide where they're going to live, where they send their kids to school, what language they teach their children, and ultimately it leads to wanting to make decisions about what kind of government they have. So this has been my belief. And what I think is interesting is that the Arab Spring, and by the way, I have to tell this story because it's so telling. I was having a discussion with a Saudi Arabian not long ago at Georgetown University, and I said, well, we call it the Arab Spring, but now it's the winter. So I think we should call it Arab Awakening. And he got really mad, and he said, what do you mean? Do you think we've been asleep all this time? And I said, well, what would you call it? And he said, well, I'd call it Arab Troubles. And I said, well, what about calling it Arab Opportunities? So there are different ways that various people are looking at it. It has been viral. There's no question about it. The whole the Google and Facebook generation, you have spread this, and it's very interesting, but it's a little bit different in each of the countries. I think ultimately the only stable form of government is a democratic government, but I think it's going to take a while. I have actually been quite critical of the way that our media has covered all of this, and that it was covering the various events kind of like a spectator sport, and that it was time limited, not even overtime like basketball, but I hesitate sports analogies, but it's more like a marathon, and I think it's going to take a long time. There'll be Heartbreak Hill and all the various things that happen, but I ultimately think that given what information technology and the younger generation wants, and the need to respond to people's wishes, yes. But there'll be lots of ups and downs. And part of the issue is, and the National Democratic Institute, we are in all these countries not telling people what their ideology should be, but just kind of doing the nuts and bolts of democracy, of how you organize or why political parties are important. I think one of the issues that's really difficult is to think about how you get people from Tahrir Square into running a country. You can't run a country by just having demonstrations. You have to figure out what the institutional structures are, and political parties to a great extent are the channel that people use to, I was talking about how the individual relates to the government. Political parties are the channel by which, for the most part, that is done. So that's the process that all these countries have to go to, how to get the people out of the square into governing a country.
You were Secretary of State during the Good Friday agreements, and I was wondering what the biggest challenge to creating peace in Northern Ireland was, and how you can apply what you learned there to resolving current and future conflicts.
Well, the thing about Northern Ireland was that this was something, obviously, that had gone on for a very long time. I found, let me just say that I was at the UN when people were talking about the issues, and I found it stunning that at the end of the 20th century, there would be arguments about religion in terms of Catholics versus Protestants. And it really led me to, later on, think a lot about the role of religion in foreign policy. And I later wrote a book called The Mighty and the Almighty about the role of religion in politics. But it was the Northern Ireland aspects that made me think, what is this all about? And so those agreements actually took a very long time. The British got very involved in it. And also George Mitchell, who was had been majority leader and kind of brought people together. What I found interesting about it, and I don't know whether the lessons work or not, but partially the IRA, we declared a terrorist organization. And yet we needed to deal with the people that they were representing. And so Sinn Féin was created as a political party that in fact had said they would give up terrorism. And it made it possible for us to have talks with Jerry Adams and trying to figure out how to make it work. And then also there was a set of agreements laid out that had a time frame in terms of disarmament. The question always people say is, are there lessons that are applicable to the Middle East? And George Mitchell was actually trying to apply some of those lessons, and not very successfully. But part of it has to do with exactly this issue. Hamas is a terrorist organization. It has declared that it wants Israel to disappear, and it has not given up terrorist methods. So what people had hoped was that there would be the creation of the Sinn Féin equivalent of the Palestinians, and that hasn't happened. And then there's some people who say that the issues in the Middle East some of them are religious, and some of them are cultural, and some of them are territorial, but that in some ways they go deeper than some of the issues that happened in Northern Ireland, and that while there are similarities, it's a model that is doesn't quite work across the board. But there are lots of interesting lessons out of it, and one of them is the separation of the insurgents into how much of it is terrorist and military, how much of it is political, and then the issue as to whether there can be disarmament and also the joining in some kind of a coalition government.
Madam Albright, you talked a lot about the growing gap between the rich and the poor and how that issue affects other major issues. What have you done in your personal life, in your career, as far as philanthropy to help those type of issues?
I do think it's one of the biggest issues, and part of it is that, first of all, it's wrong to have that kind of a distinction, and also the poor know exactly what the rich have, and so it's probably better to try to be open and sharing. I have actually done a lot of different things. In terms of, I have been interested a lot in education. I have done a lot in terms of scholarships and working with a number of organizations. I have also been very involved in international philanthropy. You were with them, did you? Amnesty International, I contribute and work with them. I have done a lot of contributing and work to the Doctors Without Borders. That was a Nobel Prize winning operation. And I have also, in fact, I'm interested you asked, because this Sunday I just sat at home and wrote a lot of checks. But I also have been out in the field with a lot of different things. One of the things that I've worked on that deals with the rich-poor, not so much in philanthropy, but in terms of thinking. Many of you have probably heard of a Peruvian economist called Hernando de Soto, who believes that poor people could be a part of their economies if they had title to the land. They actually own the land, but do they have a piece of paper that proves it so that they can get loans and work on it? So he and I worked on projects together through the United Nations and talked about the legal empowerment of the poor. And this kind of fits with the other questions that you all have asked, is that it's a UN activity. It's now the legal empowerment of the poor is part of a UN system. It also is a way to make sure that people have access to justice, that they are able to have labor rights and property rights and business rights, and allows for that gap. And also, Hernando believes that a lot of what happened in the Arab Spring, that the guy who immolated himself in Tunisia was part of an informal economy and wasn't able to make a living. So different things. But I also have been very involved in some projects in getting investment in the Middle East. And I do think that philanthropy is a very important part of how we get things done. And I believe that people to whom much is given, much is expected. And it's absolutely true. You really do feel good when you give. I felt really good last Sunday, and many of the days when I actually have tried to make a difference. The question is, and this is a real issue, as to where is the most important place to put the money. Do you know where it goes? How is it distributed? And in terms of making sure that it gets to the right people. HIV/AIDS money or family planning money or whichever group, I think, but it is very important to give. I was in Kenya and there was a program with some children, and it was on International HIV/AIDS Day, and I was sitting next to this little boy, and I had this pen, and I thought I'd give it to him, and he just looked at me and he said, "Shoes, I need shoes." And so I think the point here is trying to figure out where the right place to do. So I did send quite a lot over there. But I really do think the question is how to get from here to there again to make sure that it gets into the right channels. Thanks for asking that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Madam Albright, you mentioned nuclear weapons falling into the wrong hands, and we know that Kim Jong-il and Ahmadinejad are attempting to acquire these weapons. And what is the best way in your mind to deal with unstable leaders?
Well, to meet him, actually. I am still the highest level American official to meet with Kim Jong-il. And I have to tell the story a little bit because what happened was when I first got to the UN in 1993, the North Koreans had decided that they wanted to leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And we were going to get sanctions against them, and it was a long, complicated story. And then we worked out something called the Framework Agreement, where the North Koreans really do need some form of energy that we would supply light water reactors and heavy fuel. Long story. And we weren't getting anywhere. Finally, we had a review of our policy towards North Korea, and the North Koreans, in fact, indicated that they would negotiate. So what happened was the Vice Marshal Cho, the number 2 guy in North Korea, came to Washington, and we met. And when he first met me, he came to the State Department in a pinstripe suit and a vest and everything. And then we went to the Oval Office, and he put on his uniform, on which he had a lot of medals for killing Americans in Korea. And so anyway, he then had this red folder, and he gave it to President Clinton, and it was an invitation to President Clinton to come to North Korea. And President Clinton rightly said, well, maybe at some point I'll come, but it's important for the Secretary of State to go first. That did not thrill them. And so we didn't have an embassy in North Korea. So I had no idea what we were going to do when we got there. And we had very bad intelligence on Kim Jong-il. And it said that he was crazy and a pervert. He's not crazy. So, and so I get there, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do, and I was in the guest house, and all of a sudden I get this message saying I had to go and see his embalmed father. So Kim Il-sung, I go there, there's this body under glass, and we were just talking about this the other day. I was trying to figure out what to do, not to be rude, so I simply went like that, and then I left, and when I got back to the guest house, all of a sudden I got a message saying that he would see me. So then we had a press conference, and it was like being in some 50s movie, and I look over, and we're about the same height, and I had on high heels, and then I looked over, and so did he, and his hair was a lot poofier than mine, but we had very interesting discussions. He was very knowledgeable about all the nuclear technology, and we talked for about 12 hours, and I had learned enough about him to know that he loved Michael Jordan, so I took over a basketball autograph by him, but we had some weird discussions in terms of him saying he's very jealous of the South Koreans, and everything was done through an interpreter, and he said, so how does my interpreter compare with Kim Dae-jung's, the South Korean's leader? And I thought, I'm going to get this guy killed. So I said what was absolutely true, which is that Kim Dae-jung had the best woman interpreter in the whole world, but your interpreter is really good too. And then he said, I want to get Korean Americans to come and teach people how to speak English. So I think we were going in different ways. I think that one has to engage with leaders, and you have to primarily engage with people you don't like. You don't have to make peace with your friends, you have to make peace with your enemies. And it should not be viewed as being weak or apologizing or appeasement if you at least figure out what's going on. I think it is very, in many ways, counterproductive. I think that the war in Iraq was, Saddam Hussein was a horrible person, but we had him in a box. And so one has to be really careful in deciding whether we're going to overthrow governments. And so the most important thing, I think, is to try to figure out how to talk to people that you don't like.
Thank you so much for students for your fabulous questions, and Dr. Albright for your insight. We have just a few minutes left, so we can take maybe one or two student questions. So if there's a student that would like to ask, Philip, can you quickly approach the mic and ask your question?
Thank you, Ms. Albright, for coming to visit us. My question is, being that you are known for some of the pins that you have worn, not only I want to know which one might have been your favorite, but do you believe that something so small as wearing a pin can actually change someone's thinking about not only America, but what they might be doing to affect the world?
Yeah. Well, my favorite pin is actually a ceramic heart that my daughter made. I used to wear it every Valentine's Day, except since it's been in the show. And people say, well, how old's your daughter? And it's been 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. She said, Mom, you've got to tell people I made it when I was 5. But it is very symbolic, kind of I love hearts and the relationship. I think that part of the issue, and it goes to the last question, is how you humanize the person that's sitting across from you and yourself. And there's an awful lot about diplomacy that is just human contact. I think developing something personal that you can, in fact, identify makes a difference. So for me, the pins, I mean, I sent a lot of messages with them and I had a lot of fun with them, but I do think it also became a subject of conversation, and that people wanted to know why I was wearing a particular pin. They knew it got so they knew that when I was wearing balloons, I had high hopes, and when I was wearing flowers and butterflies, it was a good day. Bees, I think they figured out that it was not going to be good, and then the larger the insect, the bigger message it sent. Mostly, they sometimes got me into trouble. There's a great picture, if you go to the show, of President Clinton, Secretary of Defense Cohen, and I sitting on a sofa, and we do the 3 monkeys, and it just kind of happened automatically. I don't know who started it first. And so the hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil monkeys. So I decided I was so objected to President Putin's policies in Chechnya, I thought they were evil, that I wore the monkeys to our summit meeting in the summer of 2000. And we walk in, and President Putin says to President Clinton, we always notice what pins Secretary Albright wears. Why are you wearing those monkeys? And I said, because of your Chechnya policy. And he got furious at me. And he said, you have no right to speak to the Chechens. And I thought, I've really screwed up. I've screwed up the whole summit. But it turned out all right. But I do think that it's humanizing. And I think it has a lot to do, generally, in terms of diplomacy, is to realize that you are talking to another human being on the other side of the table.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we have time for just one short question.
Short answer.
Short answer. Ben?
Madam Albright, you spoke about the growing issue of the gap between the rich and the poor, both domestically and internationally. This might not be a short answer, but if you could give me a short answer about what steps we could take to close this gap between the 99% and the 1%?
Well, it's hard to give a short answer. I think the first thing that has to happen is the people in Washington that have been elected should actually do their jobs and try to figure out a way to... I have believed, when we're talking about democracy, what is democracy about? Somebody said elections. It's not just anybody can have elections. It is, we decided, in many ways, the existence of an opposition party that in many ways was willing to compromise and give people a choice and talk about what the differences are and really actually have enough confidence in each other and the population to talk about it. So I happen to think that, first of all, there's that part and that there has to be some kind of an agreement. I happen to believe, this is my belief, that the government has obligations to people in society, that in fact that there are many people who can get ahead purely by individual hard work, but there are many people who can't for whatever reason. And I believe that we come together and create a country and a government for any number of reasons, for safety and because it's an organized way to live, but partially also to help those who don't have. And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, there has to be some way that the tax system is more equitable so that people who don't have something actually get something. I also believe that people really want to work, that there is dignity in work, and as I drive around wherever, I don't think that anybody wants to be out there with a sign that says, I'm a veteran and I'm hungry, or I can't find a job, I'm hungry. I put myself into their shoes. I think, how do they do this? And so I think we owe it, and I hope that there's a way. We shouldn't be 99% and 1%. When we came to the United States in the 1950s, this was a middle-class country. That's the part that was so amazing about it. And I remember my parents, European, quote, intellectuals are a little snobby. And I remember my father saying, he was teaching, he said, I can't believe it. My student is out there pumping gas. That was when people actually used to do that for each other. Or waiting on tables. Or, he couldn't imagine some European student really going out there and working. People want to work. And I think that we need to do something about making sure that the 99% are, they're obviously the majority, and there needs to be something done in the tax system.
Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, Dr. Albright, we really want to thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to come and visit with us here at the Barack Obama Academy of International Studies. So on behalf of all of our students, our staff, and myself, Dr. Walters, principal, we want to just give you a small token of appreciation so that you remember us here at
Great.
Barack Obama Academy. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my honor to be with all of you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, it's my honor to have been with all of you. And good luck, you guys. I'm sorry we've screwed the world up so much, but you will have to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.